Good evening, afternoon, or morning to anyone that's watching this. Today we are on the 19th of March. A little late in getting this recorded, but a little stuff's been going on in my own life as usual. But this is the brief for the last 2 weeks. So the last ended recording day was on the 15th. Yeah, so guys, for the future, I think I'll be doing these about every 2 weeks. I got all the notes together, and I really didn't come up anything close to even 25 slides. The pace of reporting for Ukraine from ISW has been it's been good, but hasn't been as much as it used to be. Again, and the process for the peace negotiations or ceasefire, I mean, it depends on how you want to qualify it. It's really just kind of taking up a lot of the air in the room, and that's what they're talking about most of the time. And by the time I get all the notes curated, something new has changed, has completely changed the context, and a lot of the stuff that ISW has been talking about has is really just becoming relevant. So it's a lot of wasted time for me to to read it, write it down, email it to myself, filter, and then put it into a presentable format. And it's frustrating for me. So I'm going to try to pull back on that a little bit, improve my quality of life, and still talk about this stuff, obviously. But at the same time, the way Trump's been handling this whole thing, and Putin's how to put it, his non-responsiveness really, it's just been this obfuscation of the process and no real clarification from him on the technical details of the ceasefire. Again, he's just being ambiguous on purpose to extend this as far as possible. We'll get into the reasons why with that today and go on from there. It's yeah. So back to the show concerns, I guess. Yeah, until there's genuine, concrete things happening about the peace process, um, nothing really worth changing the show over. Um, Talking about the small ground changes, we'll do that on the map more often, but it's usually again just more tree line stuff. Stuff at Touretsk is still going on. Pokrovsk is still going back and forth. Chesiv Yar. The only real stuff that's happened over the last 2 weeks has been Kursk, but then again, that's not even really how to put it. It's not entirely out of the game. I mean, they're not in Sudza anymore, so the operation is essentially over. But they're still holding on to some ground there, and now there's reports of them moving into Belgorod. So there's a lot of moving parts, and it seems to me that a lot of the open source intel community is being a little bit more conservative with their map change reporting because I think so many of them have made small degrees and predictions and things didn't really pan out. ISW, as I mentioned about 2 weeks ago, has been trying to revise and again themselves be bit more conservative about their map changes. So the actual lines on map of where the battle line is isn't exactly as clear as it used to be either. What else we got going on? Yeah, the show. Yeah, I want to apologize for the combat footage this week. I was soloing it for 4 hours, and I got a busy life, and trying to do the show by myself and not having another person on board to kind of back check me sometimes kind of creates some issues. There was one or two videos where we played the whole thing, and I didn't hit the what was it? To remember. There was some audio problems. I didn't hit like the transition button on the studio mode in OBS, so you'd hear the audio but not the video. See the video. It would be playing from my media source file, but just to my studio presentation side of things, but not broadcast it. Stuff like that. It was just frustrating. So I need to get a third screen. But what else? I think that's really it. For anyone that, oh yeah, for donations. We did get some donations, and I always appreciate that, guys. The issue is that I do need to probably set up one for the Warcast on Odyssey. I just haven't done that yet. I mean, I don't do this to make money, but I do have a way to do it, which is fairly simple. It's through buymeacoffee.com. Go do there. It's right on the screen here, buymeacoffee.com /wcast, and anyway, so back to the donations that were given. Those were given to D's account on his channel on Odyssey. So just let me know if that happens so I can tell him about it. So and we'll go from there. Anyway, what else do we have going on? I have some articles for you guys today too. We got about a half dozen. We'll go over the news also in the background, kind of provide a better context about the expansion of the 3rd Assault Brigade into a corps now, and the downside of the USA aid being cut and how that affects the search for abducted Ukrainian children that have been brought into Russia, stuff like that. So let me just bring it up for you guys here, and we will get into the ISW brief here. Pardon me. That's the media viewer. Yeah. I had this all set up, and now I'm trying to find it again. Okay, properties. And there we are. All right, guys, here we go. So again, this is covering from the 3rd of March to the 15th of March for this year. Okay, so starting Kursk, guys, as you can see here from the map, this is the orange outline is pretty much where the pocket was, and the blue is what remains of the salient here in Kursk. The red right here is as far as they got. We talked about some of the potential goals in this operation originally were going to be Sudza, Koronevo, Glushkovo. I'll explain again here, but on the combat footage show, I explained that the original intent was to get to Koronevo and Glushkovo also. What did this goal? Well, okay, so from there we have three major, well, I'd say minor towns, but for the size of this salient, these would be the major towns they would hold. By just holding Sudza and getting to this extent of their salient here, that brought in about 100,000 soldiers and held the Russians for about 8 months. And if the Ukrainians, they were almost successful in Koronevo, they just didn't have enough umph there. And they got pushed back, and this is where the Russians pushed them from the west. So that was an obvious goal for them to get to. The problem with Glushkovo is that they did successfully isolate the Ukrainians. Glushkovo by destroying the 3 bridges on this river, but from this area they only captured Vesoloy, and they didn't secure the flanks here, which there's a chain of villages at the furthest extent here, and they were pushed back eventually. So that was the failure there. They did try, but they should have secured the villages here and then eventually pushed on to Glushkovo. And if they did, say they meet all 3 of these 3 goals, based off just the example of them capturing Suja, you could probably figure that probably 250,000 to 300,000 Russians would have had to surround this entire salient, and you could probably times that by 3 for how long it took them to just secure Sudza again. So you figure about, we'll maximize it up to 8 months, times 3, 24 months. So it would be about 2 years before they would even get this back if the Ukrainians were that successful. But unfortunately, they weren't. They did maximize a lot of their casualties and most opportunities. The pipeline attack that the Russians had here was largely ineffective in its intent of capturing the element of surprise, and they were subsequently hit with some explosives when they were emerging from that pipe. So that was rather interesting because we saw that on the combat footage show, and the problems that the Russians had elements of exposure to gas and all the other side effects of that, though. So there were actually some people that died by staying in that pipe. The reports that come from the Z side of this incursion was that some of these guys were in that pipe for like 6 days. So some of them had to be evac'd out and taken care of after that. So, but that is pretty much the culmination of this whole thing here, guys. So we'll get into the developments today on the Kursk front. Russian forces have reportedly advanced in Suja itself with support from North Korean forces. The big takeaways is that a Ukrainian source told the Ukrainian outlet Suspelny on the 9th that up to 2 battalions of North Korean forces are operating near Suja, appear to be better trained and are acting more coherently. and a Ukrainian soldier operating in the Kursk Oblast stated that Russian forces advanced south of Suja due to the support from North Korean forces and Russian forces' massive use of first-person drones with fiber optic cables. They were mainly using them along this road right here, going into Suja. And we did show a video at night of a lot of soft-skinned vehicles that were uh, abandoned or destroyed on this road between the Ukrainian border and going into Suja. It was pretty bad. So that was a big reason probably for the call by Siersky to retreat from Suja and get back to better defensive positions there. Because the Russians held this area and then they also pushed pretty close to this road, basically just logistically choking it off and doing what the Russians have been doing most of this war now since Bakhmut is just turning the Ukrainians off of a fortified holding there. Some older stuff. Okay, so yeah, the temporal correlation is the way. Sorry, still getting over that cold. The temporal correlation is what ISWs the coincidence really is what they should just say, but between the suspension of U.S. intel sharing with Ukraine and the start of Russia's collapse of the Ukrainian Kursk salient is noteworthy. Russia has been attempting to push Ukrainian forces from the salient in Kursk through slow grinding advances since the incursion began in 2024. Russia later deployed roughly 12,000 North Korean personnel in October 2024 to assist in repelling the incursion, but Russian forces continue to make gradual gains. U.S. administration, or the Trump administration, suspended U.S. intelligence sharing with Ukraine on March 3rd, or 5th, sorry, 5th. Although there continue to be conflicting reports about the details under the U.S. suspension. Um, this was restored around the 8th, I think. Um, yeah, it was only about a week though. Sorry. Anyway, but at the same time, the way this happened, guys, is that it blinded the Ukrainians from any early warning of Russian aircraft, cruise missile, ballistic missile launches, glide bombs, stuff like that. So again, this is a pattern with the U.S. government is that anytime the GOP has the opportunity, um, they assist the Russians, and this has a direct correlation with how the battle space changes. Back in October 2023, um, the I was I'm trying to remember the spending bill that was under the Biden administration was held up in the Republican House for 6 months, and that resulted in the fall of Avdiivka, which moved the front from the front of Avdiivka to Pokrovsk, which thankfully the Ukrainians have held, and that was over because of artillery discrepancies and everything else that the U.S. was trying to provide to Ukraine at that point. This has been a recurring pattern, and now we see it happening again with them blinding Ukrainian Air Force assets and the Army from knowing when this stuff happens, and just doing it very abruptly, so there's no chance to prepare. And the salient at the same time has now collapsed because of that, more or less. Um, it's just malicious. It's just evil. I mean, there's no reason to justify it though. I mean, Trump's trying to say he's saving lives, but he's literally just killing people at when he does this though. And I apologize for stuttering, but it just makes me angry. I'm trying to maintain some sort of calmness in my voice, but it's it's shit. I don't know how else to put it. Anyway, Russian forces intensified operations to expel Ukrainian forces from Kursk on on the 6th and 7th, the day after the U.S. intel was suspended. Source reportedly affiliated with Ukrainian military intel started reporting more rapid Russian advances in Kursk on March 5th. A source within the Ukrainian government stated on the 8th in a Times article, the U.S. intel sharing suspension has impacted Ukrainian operations in Kursk the most. Russian military has not previously prioritized the effort to push Ukraine forces out of Kursk Oblast over making further advances in eastern Ukraine, despite concentrating sufficient force grouping to do so since late 2024. A direct link between the suspension of U.S. intel sharing and the start of the collapse of Ukraine's salient in Kursk is unclear, is what they're saying. Although the Kremlin officials have recently announced their intention to take advantage of the suspension of U.S. intel military aid and sharing to inflict maximum damage on the Ukraine forces on the ground during the limited time frame for the possible future resumption of U.S. intel sharing and military aid to Ukraine. Because of this, this makes Ukraine's negotiating position weaker and has only further helped the Russians in their position. This is also a consequence that led on to what we'll show on the map later after we're done with the fronts here, guys. The Ukrainian operation into Belgorod. So it it's really odd how Russia is being given the carrot treatment while Ukraine's being given the stick treatment in this war, especially this phase of the war. Um, Russia being the aggressor, the one that should be punished, the one that is invading unjustifiably, is being given every incentive to continue though by treating them this way though, and with the U.S. ceding almost every position they can in a negotiation, whether it's NATO membership, U.S. or European peacekeeper, stuff like that. Um, Rubio and Hegseth and Vance, who mainly the voices for the Trump administration, have been surrendering these positions to Russia with just barely a whimper. So at this point, I mean, this is the problem. Like Ukraine is demonstrating agency in its negotiations with the United States. At the same time, there needs to there needs to be a higher how to put it, because they need an alternative, right? So Ukraine's looking to Europe, and Europe's looking to disengage itself from the United States military and all of its entanglements, seeing as how Trump's now made it a liability to be a U.S. partner. So Ukraine has become the most powerful military in Europe, but it still is dependent on some forms of support. So there's this mutual opportunity between Europe and Ukraine. I think Ukraine should be pursuing a little bit harder, and the EU needs to like I always have trouble saying this word, unbureaucratize itself, and they're way too slow. This is the problem with having such a vast bureaucracy that the EU has. It takes way too fucking much time to make any real decisions. And I know that's like it's intentionally set up that way, but at the same time, this is the most major liability of the EU. It needs to decentralize and allow individual nations the freedom to make up their own choices in these defense. How to put it, in the area of defense, nation states need to be allowed to prioritize and make up their own decisions. The EU should not be the final decision maker in any of this. By doing that, a lot of this aid and a lot of the transition that Europe needs to go through would be a lot quicker, and that'd be the opportunity for both Ukraine and most of the major EU players that want to do that. A lot of them to capitalize and move on from this disaster. So it's anyway. There's a lot to say about this, guys, but again, the Republicans are definitely have a part in this collapse. Well, I had to say collapse. You know, just the shrinking of the pocket there. But anyway, you get what I'm saying. So, a couple more notes here from Curse Guys. A Russian mill blogger claimed on the 6th that Russian forces are exercising fire control over the Ukrainian ground line communication to Sudza, and that Russian drones are continuously operating the area. Another Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces have transferred a significant part of their best FPV drone crews to the Kursk direction and have gradually improved drone operations in the area since the end of 2024. Another mill blogger claimed that Russian forces have positioned electronic warfare systems along the roads in an effort to prevent Ukrainian FPV drone strikes. And the Russian forces have deployed artillery systems almost directly to the international border to disrupt Ukrainian logistics in Sumy Oblast. The other thing at the same time is that there were a couple Ukrainian spokesmen and mill bloggers saying that they've never seen a bigger concentration of air quotes elite um, Russian forces, mainly VDV, naval infantry, and Akhmat, in one area, though. So there's a lot of suspicion that Russians are going to try to push into Sumy Oblast. As you can see here, the Russians have tried pushing into these areas a little bit. Also right here, again, these are just small toeholds, is best you could say. Some reports of sabotage and recon groups trying to break in further into Sumi. Nothing terribly serious, and it's interesting to see if they're trying to move the center of gravity again. Sumi is just right here behind all of this text right here. So it's pretty close to the international border with Russia, but again, it would be pretty hard for Russia to move into Sumi. Um, it is an area that doesn't have as many well-dug fortifications as, say, Kharkiv, Luhansk, Donetsk, or Zaporizhia. At the same time, we're seeing Russians trying to move into Zaporizhia a little bit more. We'll get to that also, but there's an interesting change in how the Russians are trying to maintain their initiative. Lastly, here, guys, Russian forces intensified their multi-directional campaign to eliminate the remaining Ukrainian salient in Kursk Oblast on March 7th and 8th. Russian forces have also begun attacking on Suja itself on the 8th. The group was composed of Chechen Ida Spetsnaz Group, the 30th Motorized Rifle Regiment, the 11th VDV Brigade, and the 177th Naval Infantry of the Caspian Flotilla were attacking the city itself. Russian-Ukrainian sources reported that Russian forces were attempting to covertly attack behind Ukraine positions in Suza via an underground gas pipeline, but issued contradictory claims about the outcome of the attack. Russian Milblocker claimed that Russian forces were attacking central Suza and the industrial zone, and that again the Ukrainians fell back. So I have a video for you guys here. This is about a minute or 2 minutes long. This is the remains of Suza after the Ukrainians left. This is from a Ukrainian drone. Fortunately, no audio on it, I believe. It's interesting how someone flies that low in an FPV drone with an explosive, just trying to scan for um, prey. I guess is the best way to put it. But yeah. And there you go. Found it. Found it. Oh, that was a Russian. Sorry, that was targeting a Ukrainian because that's a Ukrainian symbol there with the triangle. Interesting that he found it right there. So it must have been reported that there was something in the trees here. Okay. Sorry. Oh, there you go. Gotta wait for the no image to. There we go. This is the overview of it. Can't make out what vehicle it is. It hit, but don't see any secondary incendiary or fire or explosions though. So who knows what the real damage was. Anyway, so that was Kursk front, guys. Moving on to Kharkiv, a little. Kharkiv's again been pretty quiet. Spokesman for Ukraine Brigade operating the Kharkiv direction stated that Russian convict recruits with a maximum of 2 weeks training are still operating in Kharkiv direction. Another spokesman said that Russian forces conduct infantry assaults in the area because Ukraine. Oh, sorry, my bad. Sometimes this is worded oddly. Russian forces conduct infantry assaults in the area because Ukrainian drones have created a red zone behind the front line where Russian forces cannot operate armored vehicles. There you go. Sorry. This has been a common theme most of the front, though. There's been a 10 to 15, how to put it, buffer zone for most Russian armored vehicles from the contact line back behind the Russian line, because that's how far in depth that the Ukraine drones have been able to hit Russian vehicles consistently. Uh, Spokesman for Ukraine Brigade operating Kharkiv on the 12th stated that Ukraine forces are prepared for possible Russian redeployments from Kursk to the Kharkiv direction. It stated that Russian troops usually attempt to advance using small groups and motorcycle, but may encounter difficulties using this tactic given the muddier weather conditions this time of year. And the Russian forces are reportedly increasing the operational tempo in the Kupiansk direction, which would be south of there, southeast. And it was said that Ukraine officials operating the Kupiansk and Lima direction reported that the Russian forces recently increased their activity in the area and that Russian forces are attacking with mechanized equipment and large numbers of personnel. And the Ukraine spokesman for the group of forces in that area stated that Russian forces previously used icy weather to transfer equipment and infantry across the frozen Oskil River to the west bank. The Ukraine brigade operating in that direction stated that the Ukraine forces are prepared for possible Russian redeployments to there also. Anyway, yeah. And in Luhansk, okay, my mouse is acting weird. Yeah, so let's see here. The grouping of forces there, their spokesman for Ukraine stated on the 6th that Russian forces are trying to create a new bridgehead on the right bank of the Oskil River near Krasny Pershi, and that Russian forces attempted to expand their pre-existing bridgehead near Kalinove, which is south of Dovrichna, and are attempting to transfer additional units to the western bank of the Oskil while weather conditions remain fair. And the deputy commander of the Ukrainian regiment operating the Kupiansk direction reported on the 6th that warming temperatures are melting the ice on the Oskil River, which will further complicate Russian forces' attempts to cross the river. So hopefully we'll see a counterattack there by the Ukrainians and just collapse that bridgehead there. Because the Russians have been there a minute, but they haven't really been doing too much, to be honest. Deputy commander of the Russian no, sorry, the deputy commander noted that Russian forces have not transferred any equipment over the river. The Russian infantry continue to cross that river, including near Dovrichna. Ukrainian deputy commander noted that up to 500 Russian troops have crossed the river north of Kupiansk, and that Russian forces have not been able to leverage their positions on the right bank. So a little bit under a battalion. Russian Milblog claimed that Russian forces are leveraging artillery and drone superiority and manpower advantages in Kupiansk direction to advance in the area. So, okay, interesting. The commander of Ukrainian drone crew operating Kupiansk and Lima directions reported that Russian attacks have decreased in these directions on the 7th. And the same commander reported that Russian forces have been using nets to catch Ukrainian FPV drones and are deploying a significant number of Russian FPV and fiber optic drones to strike Ukrainian logistic routes in the area. This is a trend we've been seeing. The Russians were deploying these on the roads in Pokrovsk, and we've seen the Ukrainians adapt by also adopting that practice along some of their routes too. So a lot of these main ground lines of communications, they're putting up poles with netting on them, basically just to keep at least some safety from the sides of Ukrainian or Russian drones attacking vehicles. Seems to be a pretty common practice now. So that still means that the canopy over those roads are open, but the sides are now netted for the most part in some of these directions. A spokesman for Ukraine brigade operating the Lima direction noted on March 7th, they said that Russian forces are constantly attacking the Lima direction and occasionally advance during mechanized assaults. Um, when these assaults happen, Russian forces typically deploy infantry in pairs, after which groups of up to 10 to 15 soldiers attack Ukrainian positions. And we'll go to the map there and show some of those eventually. Some more notes from Luhansk. Ukrainian brigade operating the Kupiansk direction stated that Russian forces are accumulating forces in the area to conduct another assault during favorable weather conditions. And Russian forces usually conduct small infantry assaults using motorcycles, buggies, or armored vehicles. And during those assaults, Russian forces conduct 5 to 7 attacks in the area per day. That infantry suffers usually suffer between 80-90% during those assaults. Russian forces was stated that Russian forces were previously able to use the icy weather conditions again to travel to the west bank of the Oskil River, but they are now using these force accumulations to increase the number of attacks in the Kupiansk direction. Stated by the same spokesman, Viktor Trehubov, sorry, that Russian infantry groups managed to cross the Oskar River are now struggling to establish a bridgehead on the right bank before the river melts. And same stuff. Ukraine Drone Regiment reported that Russian forces are concentrating on the east bank of the Oskar River for future assaults on the right bank before more favorable weather conditions happen in the spring of 2025. And a spokesman for Ukraine Brigade in the Lehman direction stated that Russian forces have increasingly been striking Ukrainian frontline positions in that area with Shahed drones since late February 2024 and are using drones like mini glide bombs. And talked about the river already. Yeah, okay, sorry. Moving on to Donetsk here, guys. Yeah, Russian blogger claimed that Russian forces are sometimes using armored vehicles in the Udachne and Koltny area. This would be near Pokrovsk. The Russians are still trying to push north there and get to this ground line communication to Pokrovsk there. You can see a little bit of blue here and there. Ukraine's had some great successes there a couple weeks ago. Fortunately, it doesn't seem like they've been able to exploit that any further. So, looks like it's back to who's going to be trying to take the initiative again. Um, we'll get to that later when we look at the map after the fronts. Do do do. Russian forces, Russian source claim that Ukrainian forces are operating more drones in the Pokrovsk direction are preventing Russian forces from transporting reinforcements and ammunition to the front, and that Russian forces are exhausted due to several months of continuous assaults. It's interesting to note that most of the reporting I'm seeing, whoever has the advantage in drones more or less has the initiative in these areas. So I would argue that the in the Donetsk Oblast, at least from Chasiv Yar to Pokrovsk, for the most part, the Ukrainians have been able to seize the drone advantage in this area. I don't know about Velko Novosilka. Um, I just don't hear much about that. I mean, they have advanced a little in this area, but hasn't been at a breakneck pace since the fall of Volodar. And up in Kupiansk, which is up north of here, because that's Belharivka, and this is Ternay, I think. The Russians have a little bit of advantage, it sounds like, from what we're hearing from these reports, and they're pushing a little. But again, we have. I'm so sorry, guys. I apologize for that. Yeah. So anyway, we'll get back to the rest of it here. Ukrainian brigade operating the Tourette's directions posted footage on the 12th showing that Russian forces conducted a reinforced platoon mechanized assault in the area. The Ukrainian forces destroyed 2 tanks, and the other 2 tanks retreated. An officer of the Ukrainian brigade stated that Russian forces have increased the intensity of their attacks in the Tourette's direction and are conducting both mechanized assaults and small infantry assaults. The officer stated that Russian forces are conducting fewer glide bombs and artillery strikes, but are using a huge concentration of all types of drones. So this is the adaptation of the Russians to the Tourette's direction here. So we saw major counterattacks by the Ukrainians here. They had a major possibility of basically pinching off a major salient of the Russians in that urban area, but it sounds like the Russians have redirected assets in that area with armor to try to counterattack against the Ukrainians there. There is one, yeah, actually I think I showed that earlier. We'll get to the map, but in the southern part of Touretsk, there is a borough where the Ukrainians pushed a major success for them in that direction. But at the same time, it sounds like, as we were talking about, the Russians have pushed in some areas. Some of the old blue markers are now contested again, and with the see here, he's talking about fewer glide bombs. There's also been reports that it's taken the Russians 12 to 15 glide bombs to hit their target. The Ukrainians have been able to adapt and jam glide bombs now to great efficacy. So instead of the usual, because we've seen a drop off on the reports of drone attacks against like Air Force bases and stuff like that, though. So that'd be the best way they could do to deploy, to reduce and decrease the sortie rate of the Russian Air Force, though. But they had to adapt around that, I'm guessing, because the Russians started consolidating air defenses in a better fashion around their air bases. So that became a harder option for the Ukrainians to do. So they decided to fall back on the electronic warfare, and they started to successfully jam the glide bombs the Russians were deploying. So that's why the Russians, in response, in Tourette's direction, have started using drones of all types and are now using armor in an urban area to try to gain back the initiative in that area. An officer in the Ukrainian of an my bad. An officer in the Ukrainian brigade operating the Pokrovsk direction stated on the 12th that Russian forces have intensified infantry assaults, and another spokesman for another Ukrainian brigade stated that Russian forces in that same direction conduct infantry assaults at night, presumably in order to better conceal themselves from Ukrainian reconnaissance. And Russian-built bloggers claim that difficult terrain and Ukrainian FPV drones actively are complicating Russian advances near Stupachki, which is south of Chasiv Yar, which would be in this rough direction right here. Ukrainian Luhansk Group of Forces spokesman stated that Russian forces have recently significantly increased the number of artillery strikes and assaults in the Tourette's direction, and have increased the size of their infantry assault groups from 2 to 5 personnel and up to 10. Spokesman for the Ukraine Brigade operating the Pokrovsk direction again stated on the 13th that activity has decreased compared to the start of March 2025, and that Russian forces continue to attack in small groups, and that Russian forces are using fewer light armored vehicles in the area. Russian forces conduct more assaults when the weather is cloudy, likely due to decreased risk of Ukrainian drone strikes and recon, but do not use vehicles during clear weather. The Russian forces are also attacking along the same route and at the same time, and that the first group, I'm sorry, I got that note cut off there by accident. And there is this area right here in Pokrovsk. Russian bloggers claiming that they control 50% of Shevchenko. Um, the same source claimed that Russian forces are trying to regain lost positions in Dachne, Peshchane, Shevchenko, and Zelene. That's basically, we'll go to the map here, but most reliable maps I've seen have showed that Ukrainians control the majority of Shevchenko, which is really compressing that neck of the salient right here. So I'm really hoping that the Ukrainians can collapse this salient right here, because that would show good tactical coordination and be a tactical. I guess it'd be I would qualify that as an operational victory, because that would take relief off this ground link communication, free up this one too a little bit, and that would again operationally help alleviate the logistics a little bit in this area for the Ukrainians. So here's a picture of Tourette's, guys, from the 15th. Um, the neighborhood I'm talking about is Zelbalka. This was recently retaken by the Ukrainians. I want to say the one I saw, which was a satellite picture, really showed them pushing further up to almost this area right here, because I remember them being closer to this ground line communication than ISW is showing. Again, it depends on your source. There's such a wide how to put it, spectrum of where people say people are at. And, looking, this is at a micro level, really. We're talking, 5, 6 blocks of one ruined city. So, I mean, overall, and it doesn't really affect things at a strategic level. But at the same time, we'd like to know how the progress of the fighting is going. And we'll go through this, and I'll talk a bit more about this map. So, stated on the 14th that Russian forces have increased attacks in Touretsk, and that Russian redeployments have happened in the area. It was reported that Russian forces in the Touretsk direction are using physically unfit disabled soldiers, and that Russian forces have hastily advanced in central Touretsk using motorcycles sometimes to advance into incorrect areas. I guess like coordination. Ukraine brigade operating the Touretsk direction posted footage on the 12th that Russian forces are conducting reinforced platoon-sized mechanized assaults in that area. We talked about the destroyed tanks earlier. FPV drones, and okay, I'm sorry. I apologize, guys. So sometimes I have to go through the notes twice, and I think I copy pasted here again. So, but talking about this map here a little bit more. There is this waste pile here that was a marker for Zalbalka, and the Russians fell back from that area, so that gives the Ukrainians again another good vantage point over this ground line communication that runs from the central city center hospital to this main ground line communication. It's really the spine of Tourette's, and if the Ukrainians can control that elbow right there and along this street right here, that's going to impact the rest of how this salient right here is being held by the Russians. It is confirmed that the Ukrainians are still holding the Avangard Stadium and have pushed basically within 5-6 blocks of there, and they also control the Palace of Culture, I think. Last one of the sources I've seen. They're really close. I would like to see something happen, but um, again, this war has been a matter of degrees of success in every little theater. If one side could start accumulating successes upon successes, and we start seeing some real changes here. But again, it it's really just adapt the level of adaptation really is just the mode of the day, and people are just both sides are really just adjusting really well to each other. So into Kherson Zaporizhzhia, guys. Smokes of Ukraine Brigade operating in the Orikhiv direction, which would be right here in the center. Today, that Russian forces are using stolen vehicles for transportation, are mainly assaulting using foot soldiers, and spokesman had the Russian forces stop using military vehicles at the front line. Geolocated footage, which is shown right here, posted on the 6th, indicates that Ukrainian forces likely conducted a raid into occupied Oleshki, which is south of Kherson City on the in the right bank of the Kherson Oblast. Um, yeah, and this is ISW was unable to verify whether Ukrainian forces still maintain positions at the bridge, but this is a video of that, though. What interesting is the amount of interference at that altitude. Um, Usually it's a little bit better. Luhansk, I think they were saying they're using a ton of drones in some of these strikes just to hit one target, and we're seeing that happen here too. Again, with very reduced efficacy, because we're seeing at a certain point when they get below the line of horizon, I imagine, because the operators are probably so far behind, um, that connection, that how do you put it? That would put it. The line of sight that you need for the signal communication between the operator and the drone is dropping off drastically. So the video feed's cutting out, and it's just basically maintaining its course at last known speed, basically. Anyway, so that's what's going on. There's been some reports of increased Russian activity here and some successes by the Russians pushing in Zaporizhzhia, but again, nothing really to worry about, I'd say. They're just pushing along tree lines and some trench lines. Okay, let's go over to the map here really quickly. I'm going to bring that up here. Let me just double check on that really quickly here. Okay, yeah, I'll transition over here and bring it up on my end. Okay, so we're going to use Blackbird Group for this one, guys. I checked UA control map and UK daily update. That, like, for some reason their map doesn't have the control lines. I don't know. So I don't know what's going on. It's been kind of my job's been made a little bit more difficult by some of the sources that are supposed to be the good ones. They're not taking care of their own websites here. Like, I've tried refreshing it a few times and still has these problems of not showing what you'd want to see were the map lines that are in the war. It's just gone. I don't know what to say. Like, try bringing it up to the normal day. Anyway, I'm just complaining. So anyway, back over to Blackbird Group, which is a mapping group out of Finland. And this is showing the most recent updates in the Kursk salient. So you still have Ukrainians operating in the area. Russians now control basically off Suja. The Ukrainians still are operating in Gogolevka and Oleshina here, right across the border. And this map also shows what is the suspected conservative estimate, I would say, of the Ukraine incursion to Belgorod. Let me see if I can find the fortifications here. Fortifications, we'll go here. Okay, so Ukrainians haven't pushed up to that point yet. They have to capture these villages, and then once they get to Romanovka, they might try to come across this area here, but again, this time of the year is going to be muddy. Um, Without that level of surprise that they achieved in Kursk here, getting past these trench lines is going to be very, very difficult. So I don't know how far they can really expect to get into Belgorod here from this incursion. They seem to be fairly low-hanging fruit. Um, Looking at the roads, we're seeing them really just kind of run this main one here, but then they kind of break off into a T here on the backside right behind the trench line. What you want is a highway that really helps support your operation like we saw in Suja right here. From that incursion, we're not seeing really anything. These are very small country roads, which wouldn't really support a major operation like that. You'd want to maybe do something here, but you can see that the Russians have fortified. This is the international border, which is the black line here. The Russians have fortified that on their own side, and then they have a defense in depth, yeah, all the way up to Krasny Yaruga. Sorry, some of these names sound very orcish. And yeah, I mean that would be great if the Ukrainians did something there, and maybe they're trying to feint here, then push there. But I haven't heard anything in this area though. So that's what's going on in Kursk, guys. I don't think it shows anywhere the Russians pushing past there. So we did see on one other map that the Russians were pushing into Sumy a little bit, but nothing really that serious. Yeah, sorry, this is the border right here. So I'm sorry, that's one of the areas that they pushed into Novenki, sorry. Okay, pushing on down to the the Kharkiv Oblast. Nothing really new. Hilboke is contested, which is good, but again, it's been kind of that way for a while. I'd like to see the Ukrainians make a push here and push them up to this water feature right here, but that's been a pretty quiet sector at the front. Vovchansk, um, interesting how this is the aggregate plant right here, held by the Ukrainians. Nothing really going on. It was verified by one of these maps that the Russian Volunteer Corps is still operating in there. What else we can find over in Kupiansk? So this is the bridgehead across the Oskil River. Ukrainians still contest the north part of this town. Again, they still need to push into this uh, road right here, which would be a highway, to really cut off this bridgehead. Um, Russians do hold Zabodne a little bit, but again, they haven't really pushed too hard. And this is the Krasny Pershi thing we were talking about here, this little village. They tried getting across, but haven't really had too much success. Going down, so we saw last week that the Russians, the Sinkivka was contested, at least according to one of the maps, but the Russians pushed along this road right here and got to this water feature right here. And then they got stopped. So again, just kind of taking ground for ground's sake. But yeah, if they were trying to push into something strategic, they would want to get to Petropavlivka, but the pace of the war in this sector has been fairly slow. Ukrainians might make some good headway in a good counterattack here, but we'll see. We'll catch up on that next week. Nothing really new around the rest of the area. Maybe some adjustments here on the force lines, but that's about it. So going down towards Senkovo, the Russians have, I think, pushed a little bit south here, but nothing really drastic. The Ukrainians have a good belt of trench lines here. Nothing really serious, just kind of fighting along the Borovo front there. And yeah, so let's go over toward Ivanevsky. This is Makivka. Russians are trying to push still to Novomikhailivka. Nothing terribly interesting. Just again, kind of pushing out for these force lines and some of these hills. And then near Turney, the Russians. It's interesting seeing how this pocket expands and collapses in some areas, because the Russians had some of this right here, according to my memory. I think the Ukrainians pushed here. It looks like trying to get to this side right here. Then the Russians are still pushing across, trying to move from these trenches up to each trench line here, which is interesting because they're trying to take the fortifications and not trying to move around them like they do around urban areas. Um, anyway, so that's what's going on here. Kind of a seesaw a little bit. Um, Unfortunately, the Russians do control Yampolivka, but again, let's see if we can switch it over to the. Anyway, that's a Russian relic there. Anyway, going on over toward. Yep, still nothing really new over in the Serebryansk forest. That's been another fairly quiet sector considering everything. This map is saying Belharivka is completely controlled by the Russians. Most other maps I say see that it is contested still. This is the chalk pit right here, and yeah, nothing really new. Going over towards Chasiv Yar here, things are still pretty much the same. According to this map, the Ukraine's moved up a little bit in this part of the Dysyata, moving towards Pischane, but most of the north part of Chasiv Yar is contested outside of Pivnichi and Sevchenko. For the most part, I've seen most maps say that the Ukrainians hold up to the water features up in this area. Um, yeah, it's really just kind of a frustrating part for both sides there. Okay, so this is the Ivanrod Stadium right here. Again, it's really kind of weird how most maps hold this though. So again, the other map I was showing you from ISW saying that Zalbalka, which is what this says right here, the Russians hold basically this quarter, but then this part's contested. It's again, you're talking a few blocks in a ruined city. Um, and this is that um, waste pile I was saying earlier that has the good view over this ground line communication for the Russians here. But this map shows that the Russians don't control too much up here though, so that's interesting. How much they say is contested though. So this is the confirmed like Ukrainian front, but then all this is contested. So I don't know. Again, it takes about 72 hours for good combat footage to come out and kind of be verified by geolocated people. So again, based on how much we're seeing the combat reports come out, again, it's easy to report. Then you get the combat footage, there's the video, then the verification through the geolocation. Again, I would say a good cycle for all that is like 72 hours. And based on just that information, that could be days old based on, what's the reality on the ground. So I would say probably Ukrainians are holding Ivanrod. There's got to be a connection with what's held here between both lines here. So I don't know. I would depends. But Turretsk is far from over. If the Ukrainians were able to push into Zabalka here, I would imagine they have a good line of uh, logistics here a little bit, and would probably look to expand either towards the highway here or start looking toward Nelipivka. Um, that'd be interesting. We'll see. And going on over towards Pokrovsk, not a whole lot. The Russians have been trying to push towards this juncture right here, but they've been pushed back a couple times. Not much else going on to the east of Hrodlivka or Pokrovsk, or what was the other? Sorry, Munirod. The Russians have been really quagmired up here. They haven't been able to push really anywhere. And then, according to this map, the Russians are not in Shevchenko, but some of Shevchenko is contested and taken by the Ukrainians. So that's pretty accurate. Um, Most maps will claim that Uspanivka is claimed by the Ukrainians because there's a little space here between Novo Vasilivka here and Koltne. I would say because we have geolocated footage of Ukrainian vehicles in Koltne, and they probably hold it. This is Udachne right here. They don't have a name for it. There you go. So what you can see here, guys, is again the Ukrainians are only two major nodes, but from collapsing this pocket right here. So I'd imagine whoever's the group forces commander in Pokrovsk is probably eyeballing Nova, Nova Vasilivka and Nova Troyetsky. They need to push a little bit harder from Sevchenko, a little bit open ground to get through here. So I'll probably take this force line, take this road here, and move along this tree line. Try to secure their force line here and retake this trench line. Um, Russians are saying they have Pischane, so again, this map is a little weird sometimes. That would set them up for a good attack into Novotroyetsky. That might take a couple weeks. Then Novavasilivka might take a little bit more too. So as soon as those are contested, at least, we could expect a major collapse in this part here too. Not a huge part of the front. Looking at the whole thing, it's fairly small, but still, it would be a major morale boost and something to definitely say as an operational victory. Russians are still trying to push in this area, not too much effect. They're still held up in the Andreevka area. Constantinople, depending on which map you look at, is held by the Ukrainians. And out of Velko Novosilka, they have taken Novi Komar, Skudny, and some other smaller villages, still south of the main lines of fortification there. And over towards Zaporizhzhia here, this is where the Russians have been mainly pushing out of, trying to basically push up to this highway here and try to take over Stepove. Again, pretty far still from the main fortification lines. These are ruins. Nothing really strategic there. Kamiensky is still held by the Ukrainians. The bridge is blown here, so there's no way for the Russians to cross that easily. And there's a water feature. It's just hard for the Russians, and there isn't really much going on for the Russians in this area. Not a whole, again, based off the reports we get, not many mechanized assaults, older mobilized people and convicts. So, again, most of their good forces are in Kursk and some other areas, but Russians are really pushing with not a whole lot of skilled armed forces. And that strikes we were seeing from the drones was near Oleshki, which was in this area right here. Um, didn't say Dache, but it was, again, probably in this area right here, though that was contested. So it's just interesting to note because those were Russian drones. So maybe the Ukrainians have pushed further here. Anyway, just interesting to note. All right, guys. Going back to our brief. Oh yeah, so yeah, no breaks today, guys. I'm just gonna pump this out and then I'll post it out on the usual social stuff, and we'll get back to our headlines here. Pardon me. Okay, so we'll start off with our missile headlines here first. So this is an interesting graph I was able to find. This only goes up to the 7th. So um, based off what we saw at the beginning of the year, this is a day-by-day graph actually. A lot of attacks by drones, which are in blue, and then the orange represents missiles. It would be either like Iskanders or KH-101s or trying to think of other ones. You don't see a whole lot of caliber missiles anymore, but ballistic missiles or cruise missiles. As Trump has tried to negotiate these talks, we've seen a gradual increase over time of these missile strikes. When Russia talks were happening in Saudi Arabia and Jeddah, we started seeing a major culminating point drop off, and then another major missile strike and another major number of drones. Um, yeah, this is again Putin trying to impress upon Trump the impression of strength in all these talks. It was interesting just before getting into these talks and them culminating at it's not a culminating point, but like it is a high watermark for this phase of the talks. So Trump's conditions were a ceasefire along the entire front and everything else, right? But that was eventually negotiated down. So he went to Ukraine, and Ukraine said, "Yeah, we could do these things." And then he goes talks to Russia for like 2 weeks, and he gets negotiated down to a ceasefire on energy infrastructure. you know? Yeah, he really is his own worst enemy. He doesn't know how to do any of this. He is really terrible at foreign diplomacy. He thinks he's good at it. He's very ambitious because he doesn't think that the mainstream sources have been very successful. I would say they were more consistent than him, but their diplomacy really lacked any vision for a clear victory in the war. Um, they didn't want to hurt Russia too much. They wanted to keep Ukraine in the fight. Ukraine was very frustrated with the Biden administration for good reason. But the way Trump's handling this, It it's hard not to argue that it's a little worse, obviously, because they deliberately turned off intelligence, been withholding support for Ukraine, and have been actively lobbying, I would say, for Russia in the public sphere. And we also have that UN vote we'll talk about later. Anyway, so getting some of the details here, guys. Over the last week, between the 2 weeks ago for the ninth and from the March 2nd to the ninth, a 7-day time frame, Zelensky reported that there were 1,200 glide bombs, almost 870 drones, and over 80 missile types of various kinds launched to Ukraine over the past week in that time frame, which would be basically the second right here and then up to the 7th. So you kind of see how that just spikes right there. Consistent Ukrainian strikes against Russian air defense assets are reportedly allowing Ukrainian long-range drones to increasingly penetrate Russian air defense umbrella in deep rear areas, including Moscow. Krasnodar Krai, this is just some examples. I'll go through one of them. Krasnodar Krai reported that Ukrainian drone strikes hit the Tuapse oil refinery, which is one of their biggest ones, overnight, and caused a fire at one of the oil tanks that burned an area of over 1,000 square meters. Um, yeah, let me read this here. It was stated that the Tuapse oil refinery is one of Russia's largest refineries. It can process 12 million tons of oil per year. Stated by the same spokesman that Ukrainian drones also managed to damage multiple unspecified facilities in Moscow Oblast the morning of March 14th, and Russian authorities and sources claim that downed Ukrainian drones damaged residential buildings in Moscow. Some other successes: the Ukrainians hit a gas compressor that is also a storage facility for S-400 and 300 and S-400 air defense missile fuel, I think. Yeah. Anyway, storage facility also. Sorry, my bad. Um, Yeah, it was stated also that Russian authorities have concentrated air defense systems around Moscow at the expense of other areas in Russia due to a significant shortage of radars and air defense systems. Ukrainian drone strikes have destroyed a significant number of air defense systems and radars both along the front and within rear areas in Russia and in occupied Ukraine, highlighting the tactical Ukrainian drone strikes have likely significantly degraded Russia's ability to effectively defend strategic level military industrial assets in deeper areas. There was also the success of the upgraded Neptune missile hitting I forgot which oil refinery it was, about 1,000 kilometers into Russia's interior. So, very successful strike. And that was all before the Ukrainian side agreed to this energy infrastructure ceasefire. So there was also reports of, let me think here, the Crimean Bridge. Forget the name of it. Yeah, the bridge over the Kerch Strait Bridge. Sorry. Didn't get any reports of it being damaged or hit or anything like that because that has been fortified very well by the Russians. So it seems like both sides were trying to send out as much as they could before they expected the ceasefire to happen. Before I get into it, I would argue that this is probably at Russia's benefit that this happened, and I'll explain it because now we're going into spring. The efficacy of these Russian strikes upon the Ukrainian energy grid, it's diminishing returns at this point. And they understand that, so going into this, they're going to be decreasing their strikes already into Ukraine for the specific reason of making it cold and miserable for the Ukrainian population. So they're like, well, okay, we're already going to decrease it, so we'll not just do it anymore. At the same time, Ukraine has increased the efficacy of their strikes on Russian energy infrastructure, but at the same time, Trump being Trump has given Ukraine the stick and has basically coerced them into this sort of agreement. But at the same time, there is word just today, before I came online to record this, that Trump is going to start asking around for Patriot air defense missiles and systems to be given to Ukraine that are in Europe. Why he wouldn't help out in pull from our own stocks in America, I don't know, but that's just Trump being Trump because he thinks we need Patriot missiles. Yeah, I don't know. Man's an idiot. Okay, so let's get into some of the details here. I'm going to go over the broad strokes, guys. My notes had a play for play because at the time I was recording all this, though, I didn't know really where it would land, and I wanted the details, but then it again, nothing. It was a nothing burger again. So that Chud Jack wins again. Nothing ever happens. It was just an energy infrastructure ceasefire. So it wasn't a armistice. It wasn't a truce of any sort. It was just a ceasefire on one specific facet of the war. And now the next step I'm hearing is that, oh, we'll have a ceasefire on the Black Sea. It's like there's effectively been this stalemate there for months, if not close to a year now. So it's just like Russia's just tossing Trump a bone over things that are not really affecting the battle space. Anyway, it's fucking gay. That's all I can say. Anyway, so into the ceasefire stuff, guys. Russia continues to publicly claim that it wants peace while offering no concessions of its own, in sharp contrast to concessions, Ukraine has already offered. Reuters report on the 9th that two U.S. officials stated the U.S. is planning to use the March 11th U.S. talks in Saudi Arabia as part of an effort to, is in part to determine whether Ukraine is willing to make material concessions to Russia to end the war. Why they would have to do that? Yeah. Anyway, it's just evil. One U.S. official stated Ukraine cannot say, I want peace and I refuse to compromise on anything. Well, actually, you can, because they're the victim in this fucking injustice. Anyway, you want peace, but a peace that is going to bring about a just peace that they deserve, and kicks out the bad guy. Anyway, fuck, dude. Anyway, the other U.S. official stated that the U.S. wants to see if Ukrainians are interested not just in peace, but in a realistic emphasis added peace. Yeah, this is the problem with the way these talks are going. It seems the way it's going most of the time is that Trump will talk to one party about an issue, and then the next issue he'll talk to the next party first, and then kind of do this vice versa thing. Kind of, you go first, then you're second. The next issue I'll talk to you first, and then you're second. This sort of thing. But at the same time, if you're going to be an ally and be a superpower in the world, that for a side in the war that should be your friend and you have given supplies to, they should be the ones you consult first all the time. That's how these things usually work, instead of trying to play as the neutral party. Anyway, the Financial Times report on the 9th that unspecified officials briefed on the upcoming U.S.-Ukrainian negotiations stated that Ukraine will propose a partial ceasefire with Russia for long-range drone and missile strikes and combat operations in the Black Sea. There's also talk about a POW exchange that was already in the works that happened yesterday. I think it was about 175 for 175 POWs were exchanged. I don't know the composition of, it was like Azovstal veterans or anything like that, but it was just a POW exchange one for one. Ukrainian source noted that these proposals are realistic to implement quickly and to control. Ukrainian Zelensky suggested a ceasefire in the air and sea on March 5th, and Ukraine is offering the kind of ceasefires that are more straightforward and do not require extended negotiations or a complex monitoring process. So Zelensky is trying to be amicable in this whole process, but Trump's just fucking it up still. A ceasefire along the a ceasefire along the thousand kilometers of complex front line, characterized by multiple gray zones where the lines are opposing forces are blurred, would be extremely difficult to negotiate and monitor. Zelensky has also indicated several times, indicated by his Fox interview on February 28th, that he's willing to make concessions on territory, Ukraine NATO membership, and even his own tenure in office in order to secure a just and sustainable peace. It's true. He says, yeah, we'll have elections in 180 days after the war is concluded. There are ways of being a NATO member, which is kind of interesting, and I think that's actually the smart way to do it. That way, Russia can go back to its own population, say that Ukraine's not going to join NATO, but you can still have European troops there and integrate to a NATO standard and this whole thing, right? So it'd be everything but like the official rubber stamp on it. But as far as territory goes, it would be, what do you say? I'm trying to remember. The occupied zones would be, for now, acknowledged that they can't be taken militarily, but would be long. That would be a long-term goal, and that quote diplomatically would be sought to be brought back into Ukraine. There's ways of doing that. Obviously, you could ask for um, rights of movement for people to work in either zone. Long term, say that Ukrainian language schools would be open in actual Ukraine, stuff like that. Again, that's probably unrealistic in some sense, but long term, these things are worked out diplomatically. Maybe a change of office if Putin kicks the bucket really quick. We'll see. But anyway, Russian officials, in contrast, continue to reiterate Putin's 2021 and 2022 demands. Sergei Lavrov claimed in an interview to quote, New Regions of Russia magazine published on the 10th, that any future peace settlement must eradicate the root causes of the war. Lavrov defined the root causes of the war as the alleged quote threats to the Russian security from the Ukrainian and Western directions in general unquote that are due to NATO's eastward expansion and that the Ukrainian government's alleged extermination of everything that's connected with Russia and the Russian world or Ruski Mir, including Russian language, culture, orthodoxy, and media. Well, fuck, dude. I mean, you've weaponized your Orthodox Church because Kirill is a fucking FSB asset. Your media is state-owned. Your culture is mixed. So Ukraine's got their own culture that they want to foster as an ethno-state, and Russian language. Well, that's the other thing. I was watching a thing last night on. It was a Polish uh, news station on YouTube, right? I watch a lot of just off the wall things about news and stuff. Anyway, so it's a formal broadcast, but they were talking about for 30 minutes about how Central Asia is reverting to their indigenous languages and alphabets away from Russia. And I thought that was an interesting like peripheral study in how soft power is manifesting itself and pushing back against the legacy of Soviet and Russian influence in those countries. Basically, the way it works, I think they were talking about Uzbekistan, so I don't remember the exact country, but they were talking about Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and some other countries. But in some of these countries, they originally had no language, so the alphabet had to be brought in. When Islam came in, they brought in the Arabic alphabet. Sorry, and then say what was the other country? One of them had the Persian alphabet, and so there's different examples. Uh, then they went from Arabic to Latin, and then from Latin they had to go to Cyrillic. Yeah, and the way they're doing it in one of these countries they were using as an example, they're reverting from the Cyrillic alphabet to the Latin alphabet, and that that was interesting because to me that's kind of a Western import, obviously because it's Latin, but that was the other alphabet that most nations revert to. In case of like Romania, Romania had a Cyrillic alphabet for its own language too, but again to push back against the Russian influence, they used the Latin alphabet of their own volition. That was manifested out of their own free will. So that's happening also in Central Asia, which I find interesting though. I'm sure the handful of Russian Z people that listen to this show, hate watch it at least, they would say that's a manifestation of Western influence and that sort of thing. I'm like, well, don't be the bad influence on these cultures then. It's not like China has had a major military conquest legacy in a lot of these areas. It's certainly economic because of the Silk Road and stuff in that area. But whatever country wants to choose its own alphabet, I think that's how to put it. It's a cornerstone of what they want to manifest their identity as. And I know I'm getting off on a tangent here, but them pushing back on the Cyrillic alphabet in their own countries is certainly a testimony to um, the the paranoia that Russia's been trying to say that is really happening. Anyway. It's interesting because culturally speaking, there are ways of projecting might, right, across the world. There's economic, there's military, there's diplomacy, there's cultural, religious. A lot of ways of doing this, though. Russia's way past its prime And what we're seeing with just like small countries in Central Asia in this case is that they're pushing back against that, and there's nothing really Russia can do. They're floundering in Ukraine, and they're losing influence in their own fucking backyard. And we don't see a whole lot of shine, at least from what I was hearing from these two Polish speakers. They were saying that China is just kind of developing economic ties. They're not really trying to influence it too culturally. They might be worried about kind of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang province. So they're just kind of keeping that at arm's length, I guess, probably. But at the same time, Russia isn't keeping up its own influence in its own backyard. I would say at this point it would be much easier for them to keep Central Asia in their pocket, but they're just expending all of that capital in eastern Ukraine. So anyway, it's just interesting. Let me go down here a little bit. Um, yeah, so yeah, we're talking about the eastward expansion in Ukrainian government. Um, yeah, and the orthodoxy in language and culture and stuff like that. But again, the main concern really is like they're listing off these small details, but it's really just they want license to have a sphere of influence in any part of Europe. Unfortunately, Belarus fell under that through Lukashenko, but I would say as a white nationalist, these guys can go fuck themselves. Like, no, you don't get to have imperial coercion over any European nation. Lavrov similarly defined the alleged root causes of the war in late December 2024, and the Kremlin's rhetoric on the topic has not changed over the last 2 months, even at the start of the U.S.-Russian bilateral talks in February 2024. Russia's repeated rhetoric about the root causes of the war and constant reiteration of its specific unchanged demands contrasts sharply with the flexibility Ukraine has shown. Um, that probably should be fixed. That should probably change. I think by Ukraine showing flexibility to try to show that's amicable and not being a hostile party in these negotiations has actually worked against them. But again, the shit diplomacy of the Trump administration has caused major problems for Ukraine. At this point, I think it's really just a how to put it. I'm not saying that the Kremlin's obviously Trump and Putin are talking on the phone, but the way it's working out between Vance, Rubio, and forgot the other guy, Musk, it's just working in Russia's favor. So it's just bullshit. So recent summary basically of a recent Financial Times article shows that Trump's peace efforts are failing. This is kind of a summary of the last 2 weeks. His phone call with Putin failed to lead to a full ceasefire in Ukraine like he said he would, and Russia only agreed to limit attacks to limit its attacks on energy facilities. The Gaza truce has also failed. This is another piece of news we'll talk about probably next week as soon as we get combat footage. The war is back on in Israel. The truce is broken, and recent bombings by Israel in Gaza are now over 400 fatalities, I think, actually. Yeah. So, in Trump's foreign policy mistakes raise concerns about U.S. influence and leverage. Critics say his impatience and lack of strategy are emboldening his opponents, which is clear for everyone to see. So, Trump's making the world way less safe. I would argue. At least to some extent, Biden kind of was pushing, or at least plugging the hole with his thumb. Trump's just kind of pulling it open a little bit more with the way he's doing things. Ukrainian opposition politicians have rejected the possibility of holding elections in Ukraine before the end of the war. Former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko stated on the 6th that Ukraine should only hold presidential elections once martial law ends. And former Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko said she also opposes holding elections during the war. Russian Insider reports that the demands of the Kremlin may make before agreeing to a temporary ceasefire in line with Russian officials' public statements in the past months. Putin outlined in June 2024 and reiterated in December 2024 his prerequisite demands for agreeing to a ceasefire. These include full Ukraine withdrawal from the territory of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson Oblast that Russian forces currently occupy. Kremlin officials have repeatedly insisted on Kremlin officials have repeatedly insisted that any peace negotiations to take into consideration the realities on the ground, unquote. And Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov notably claimed on the 24th of February that Russia should only stop military activity in Ukraine when peace negotiations bring about a solid, stable result that suits Russia and account for the realities that they keep claiming about on the ground. Um, Kremlin officials, including Putin, have repeatedly claimed that any peace agreement must take into account the root causes of the war, etc., about NATO's expansion. So, like, it's weird. Like, what would that mean? Would that mean that the Baltics and Finland and Romania and Poland are no longer NATO members? it's it would just be kind of crazy. Um, yeah, in a leaked February 24, 2025 document from a think tank close to the Russian FSB, it outlined a possible Kremlin negotiating strategy largely in line with how public rhetoric has manifested, and has also shown in the March 12th Russian Insider News reports. Washington Post reported on the 12th that European Intelligence Service obtained a document from a Russian think tank close to the Russian FSB's Fifth Service, which oversees operations in Ukraine, amongst other things. Was written a week before the February 18th U.S.-Russian talks in Saudi Arabia. The document states that peace settlement to the sorry. Document states that a peace settlement to the war in Ukraine cannot happen before 2026. It rejects the deployment of peacekeepers to Ukraine and calls for recognition of Russia's sovereignty over occupied Ukraine. The document also calls for the creation of a buffer zone, which is possibly why we're going to see some action on the Sumy Oblast with the Russians if they can do that. Creation of a buffer zone on the international Ukraine-Russian border, including near Bryansk, Belgorod, and the demilitarized zone in southern Ukraine near Odessa and occupied Crimea. The document also states that Russia needs to completely dismantle the current Ukrainian government and rejects a possible Ukrainian commitment to not join NATO or to hold elections that include pro-Russian parties as insufficient measures. Again, this is basically just complete capitulation. Sorry. Document rejects any U.S. plans to continue supplying weapons to Ukraine after any future peace deal, and any Ukrainian plans to maintain its current number of military personnel. Document also outlines ways in which Russia can strengthen its negotiating position by exacerbating tensions between the United States and both the People's Republic of China and the EU. It also calls on Russia to grant the United States access to Russian-controlled minerals in occupied Ukraine, and for the Kremlin to focus on normalizing its relations with the United States by restoring embassy functions and appointing Alexander Darchchev as the Russian ambassador to the United States, in which we've seen him at some of these talks, and Putin publicly say about granting mineral access to these occupied zones that are in Ukraine. So the veracity of this report's been pretty much confirmed, I would say, at this point. And excuse me one sec, guys. I need to blow my nose. Okay. Still on this theme of Russia here, so moving over toward the UN. This is something I wanted to put in PowerPoint format here, just to kind of show everyone. Russian officials continue to capitalize on Trump administration statements and actions in an attempt to divide the United States and Europe. Sergei Lavrov claimed in an interview to the New Regions magazine, published on the 10th, the United States and Russian diplomats voted in the same way for the first time in 3 years against the Ukrainian and European-backed United Nations resolution on February 24th. This kind of blew the minds of a lot of, I don't know how to put it, neo-reactionaries. They always claim the West is Zionist occupied, which, by large measure it is. There's major fucking Zionist influence in a lot of lobby groups. But this defied every little bit of their pro-Russia stance. This specific vote on the 24th of February said how Russia is the aggressor in the war, and it was Israel, Niger, Palau, Mali, the Marshall Islands, Israel, Haiti, North Korea, Central Africa, Belarus, Burkina Faso, Burundi, and the United States, and Russia and Sudan all voted against that. The obvious countries that would condemn Russia as being the aggressor in this war would include Turkey, Ukraine, Canada, France, Germany, all the usual countries, right? There was a few that abstained, like Algeria and Armenia. But that Russia, Israel, and the United States all voted along the same lines to say that Russia was the aggressor is definitely a break in relations and a uniform approach that all three nations are now in lockstep in looking how this war is. That has many implications in a narrative sense for these sort of people. But yeah, it reinforces what we've been saying for a very long time. Um, White nationalism is about the sovereignty and the right of any white nation ethnos to rule itself as best as possible. And the way the United States and Israel and Russia have voted on this, though, it's a hard hard copy of how this is going in the world right now. That if these powers are trying to divide up a white nation between each other, this only solution is a revolt in these sort of countries, and to break the global hegemony that is trying to divide this white nation. And Israel being on the side of that, but still getting help from the United States, and also having a lot of Russian influence in that country, and vice versa. Um, Shows that there is definitely a collusion of powers in this realm of diplomacy. The resolution commemorated the third anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, recognized Russia as the aggressor in the war, and called for a just peace in Ukraine and supported Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Lavrov claimed that the ultra-liberal ruling elites of the West support Ukraine, and that the EU countries and the United Kingdom maintain predatory colonial habits. Anyway, the chutzpah, it's just the one word that really defines Russia at this point. Um, Lavrov nobly did not mention the United States likely an attempt to drive a perceived ideological wedge between the United States and Europe. Lavrov's use of the ruling elites narrative echoes Putin's February 27th claim that some Western elites are trying to maintain instability in the world and will try to disrupt or compromise the United States-Russian dialogue that has begun. Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, or SVR, um, claimed on the 10th that the UK government is prioritizing undermining Trump's peace efforts and has tasked non-governmental organizations with demoralizing Trump. I okay. Anyway, that's just kind of funny to me. Anyway, well, I have not seen any of that really. I mean, there's been how to put it, justified critique of his approach and his inexperience in these sort of things, but that's been about it. Okay, Russians in Sumy Oblast. So we saw this little sliver on the map here. Some more details about that. For the first time since 2022, when Ukrainian forces pushed Russian forces from significant swaths of Ukrainian territory following the initial months of the Russian advances, Russia re-entered Sumy. Russian forces likely intended to leverage limited advances in Sumy to completely expel Ukrainian forces from Kursk. Some geolocated footage there showing where they are in the Ukraine. Russian bloggers recently claimed Russian forces seized Basivka and Novinky, sorry. Ukrainian sources stated on the 7th that Russian forces have gradually been advancing in the area in recent weeks. So probably force line by force line there. Russian forces are currently 6 kilometers from the H07 highway, which is this right here, and 9 kilometers from Yunkivka, at the furthest point of advance in the northern Sumy Oblast, and will have to identify and establish usable crossing over the Lochna River if they intend to advance directly southeast towards the highway from the Beskivka area. Russian military command has likely ordered Russian forces to cut that highway in order to complicate Ukrainian logistics at the Kursk salient as part of a long-term Russian effort to force Ukraine to withdraw from Kursk under the threat of envelopment. Russian forces have reportedly made limited advances in Sumy, south of Plakovo, in early January 2025. Russian forces may be attempting to advance along the southern flank, etc., etc. So, anyway, a lot of smaller roads and over cross fields here, so it's been very slow for them. But no real threat of rapid advancement, though. And continued here, Russian military command may have tasked these relatively more elite units to lead Russia's efforts to envelop Ukrainians in the salient in Kursk Oblast from the south. Russian forces would have to close the gap of roughly 35 kilometers in order to envelop Ukrainian forces in Kursk, and this operation will likely be difficult should Ukrainian forces choose to defend the highway to support the remaining salient in Kursk. Russian forces are unlikely to conduct significant offensive operations towards Sumy as long as Ukrainian forces hold positions in Kursk, however. Putin seized. So this is something I mentioned on the show earlier, on the combat footage Monday. The way Trump has been talking to Putin publicly, this is kind of a new precedent in international affairs that international dialogue is happening very publicly on social media and on TV this way. It's not happening through official channels. Trump will make a statement about him saving 20,000 Ukrainian soldiers in Sudzha or something like that, right? And Putin will, in this case, reiterate, like, yes, I will let them survive if they surrender, and yada yada yada. So it's this weird information bubble where because Trump hates the liberal media, mainstream media, so much, he has started to listen to Russian state media as an authoritative source of how things are in Ukraine. And the way he's picked up on these things is that, well, the Ukrainians are surrounded in Sudzha and in the rest of the Kursk salient. We have to go and save them, so I'm going to do the good thing and save these lives. But then Putin is looking at Trump saying these things like, well, I'm going to massage his perception a little bit and say, yes, you are doing the right thing, and the Kyiv has to surrender, and this whole thing. It was a really odd piece of theatrics because like Trump's operating his own information bubble, and it's not the reality clearly that's happening on the ground in the Kursk salient. But then you have the aggressor in this war manipulating who's supposed to be the mediator in this whole thing and saying, "Oh yeah, you're doing the right thing by with by." I'm sorry, I'm losing my words here. You get what I'm saying. I'll leave it at that. And I'll just read the rest of this here. Putin seized on a statement by Trump around the supposed encirclement of Ukrainian forces in Kursk Oblast to distract from his recent rejection of the U.S.-Ukraine ceasefire proposal. Again, he talked down from an actual ceasefire to just not an inconsequential, but a small piece of a facet of the war, like just not targeting energy infrastructure, which really is just a rejection of Trump's proposal. Trump stated in a post on Truth Social on March 14th that Russian forces have completely surrounded thousands of Ukrainian forces, presumably in Kursk, and called on Putin to spare their lives. Putin responded directly to Trump's request through his March 14th Security Council meeting and claimed that Russian forces will guarantee, quote, the life and decent treatment of Ukrainian forces in Kursk if Ukrainian forces surrender. Putin reiterated unsubstantial claims that Ukrainian forces in Kursk Oblast have committed crimes against Russian civilians in the area and said that Russia considers the Ukrainian incursion an act of terrorism. And Putin claimed the Ukrainian authorities must order Ukrainian forces to surrender in order for Russia to implement Trump's request. So, yeah, Putin is attempting to present himself as a reasonable and merciful leader with whom Trump can engage and generate a new narrative to distract from Putin's decision to reject the U.S.-Ukraine ceasefire proposal on March 13th. Yeah. I mean, it if this doesn't show how much of an idiot Trump is, I don't know what else to say, guys. Like, um, Trump is genuinely being played by Putin in many ways. This is just one of the worst and most egregious examples that has really been manifesting itself. Yeah, it's just nuts. Okay, so yeah, we'll go on to some more news here, guys. Sorry, this is an older slide here. Yeah, for some reason that wasn't deleted out of the PowerPoint. Let me just do that in the background here. Um, yeah. Okay. 1 second. Let me just kill that really quick here, because that does bug me. And delete that, and we'll get back to the PowerPoint presentation here from that. Okay, sorry, from the current slide. Get back to the PowerPoint here, and there we are. Okay, go up. Yeah, NATO versus Russia. So, yeah, this is just kind of a ball of information here I want to show with you guys. Lithuania's intelligence services assess that Russia may have the capabilities to conduct a limited campaign against one or several NATO nations within 3 to 5 years. Assessment that is consistent with ISW's assessment about Russia's efforts to restructure and prepare its military and society for future conflict with NATO in the medium to long term. The Lithuanian State Security Service and Second Department of Operational Services, published a declassified national threat assessment on March 6th and assessed that Russia's further development of military capabilities may encourage Russian leadership to use military force if Russian officials calculate that NATO's alliance is sufficiently ill-equipped to react decisively, such that Russia could localize an attack on a NATO member state and obtain a swift and decisive victory. Kind of doing the kind of falling for it again card, I guess, but same time, there is still a chance that this might happen. This would be likely, say, the Suwalki Gap. That way they could like physically isolate the Baltic states from Poland, or what else? Say taking a stab at one of the Baltic states in a small incursion where they take a small portion of the Russian minority in one of those states, right? Just testing it a little bit. There was some assessments by a fan in our chat sent me a video about one of these things, and their assessment was, in my opinion, I always appreciate people giving me information because I do get good stuff from a lot of people. That particular video, however, their assessment was pretty much just clickbait garbage. I'll give you one quick example. They were saying how there were close to 200 tractor trailers on this piece of satellite footage, and they were sitting there for 4 months. Like, that doesn't make much sense to me. Like, why would they have tractor trailers just sitting on a highway for 4 months like they did in north of Kiev? It's just kind of silly. Anyway, uh, the VSD and the two services we mentioned earlier assess that a diplomatic solution to the war in Ukraine is unlikely in the short term, as Russia's main objectives to subjugate Ukraine has not changed. The SVD and AOTD assess that Russia has enough domestic political support to continue the war in Ukraine for years. Yeah. Lithuania's assessment largely coheres to ISW's longstanding assessment that Russia is uninterested in peace agreement to end the war in Ukraine in the near term, that Western estimates for the timeline of a Russian attack on a NATO member state correlate closely with ongoing Western sanctions limiting Russia's defense industrial capabilities. So any help by Trump in alleviating sanctions would only bring another war in Europe much closer. Um, yeah, his foolhardiness in saying he's saving lives is only going to allow the aggressor, Russia in this case, to commit to another war that much quicker, instead of actually solving or getting to the solution, which is to beat Russia in the current war. That's really the only solution I see in any of this. Um, Anyway, any effort by Western powers to alleviate sanctions pressure on the Russian regime will accelerate Russia's capacity to optimize its military and further embolden Russian leadership, as Russia's defense industrial base remains constrained by financial mechanisms in the medium to long term. Just a funny video. I want to share this here with you guys. Putin visited the Russian military command post in Kursk for the first time since Ukraine's incursion into Kursk since August 2024, demonstrating Putin's desire to use Russia's seizure of Sudzha to project military success and strengthen against the backdrop of the Ukrainian temporary ceasefire proposal. So this is that. It is worth noting that Gerasimov is being shown publicly on video with Putin. That shows that he still has some favor enough with Putin to be in the same space with him. Putin visited a command post in Kursk and heard reports from Russian Chief of General Staff Army General Valery Gerasimov. Putin acknowledged that Russian forces have yet to completely push Ukraine forces out of Kursk and stated that Russian forces must seize all of Kursk in the shortest possible time. This is only the second time that Putin has visited Russian forces on the front lines since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion since 2022. Putin visited the Russian Dnieper grouping of forces headquarters in occupied Kherson and the Vostok Rosguardia headquarters in occupied Luhansk in April 2023. He wore a uniform, which is a remarkable departure from his usual suit and tie. Likely just showing he's a wartime leader. That's that whole thing. Anyway. Some almost at the bottom of the stack headlines here, guys. Intel was suspended, obviously, what we talked about, and how the EU tried to get around this suspension by U.S. of its own intel for Ukraine and the EU. Western Ukraine officials indicated that the U.S. suspension of intelligence sharing is generating battlefield effects, like we talked about in Kursk. Time reported on the 8th that 5 senior Western Ukraine officials of military officers stated that the suspension of U.S. intelligence to Ukraine has helped Russian forces advance on the battlefield. This has left Ukraine forces unable to use, quote, some of their best weapon systems, which would include like HIMARS pictured here with a Gilmer's rocket. Source in the Ukrainian government stated that the suspension has impacted Ukrainian operations in Kursk and that most of the Ukrainian forces have lost the ability to detect Russian aircraft approaching Ukraine, compromising Ukraine's ability to warn civilians and military personnel of incoming Russian attacks. There were a couple of instances where Russians attacked civilian infrastructure and have killed civilians because of this suspension of military intelligence sharing and early warning capabilities. CNN report on the 8th that Ukrainian officials stated that Ukrainian officials stated that Ukrainian forces may run out of artillery shells by May or June 2025, likely referring to only the stockpiles of U.S. supplied ammunition. Um, Ukrainian officials stated and told CNN that Ukraine may exhaust its stockpiled Patriot air defense missiles, upon which Ukraine relies to shoot down Russian ballistic missiles in a matter of weeks. That's why over the phone call with Trump and Zelensky asked Trump, and Trump's going to look into European stockpiles for that. So that's always been very low. Fuck, dude. I just really wish we'd like back horse really and just have them win. You know, it defies logic why at this point these half measures are continuing. You know, it's like fuck this shit. Just win the fucking war. Just win it. Anyway, Europeans and save civilians. European states continue efforts to supplement intelligence sharing with Ukraine following the U.S. suspension. So this is just a reason why I wanted to share this. Again, this is rather old because it was turned back on, but this is how these things are happening now. With Trump's ADHD, he'll provide support one day, then turn it off and turn it back on. It's just this insecurity, this lack of confidence in the United States is forcing a lot of people to ask a lot of hard questions and forcing them to adapt. So I wanted to look into how Europe tried to adapt to the lack of U.S. intelligence sharing and where the gaps are. Um, Unfortunately for Europe, they don't have the capability to really make up totally that loss of U.S. Intelligence sharing. They don't have the capabilities of really warning aircraft. They have some, but not what the U.S. has. A lot of other measures like that, though. So this is something that's going to have to be a long-term endeavor for the Europeans and Ukraine to overcome and circumvent ultimately U.S. military influence on the continent. French Foreign Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesman Christophe Lamond stated on the 8th that European states discussed how to try to compensate for the intelligence that the United States may stop providing during that March 6th EU summit. Stated that France would continue to provide intelligence to Ukraine, and a French outlet Intelligence Online report on the 8th that Safran.ai, a subsidiary French Defense Corporation, will provide Ukraine's main intelligence directorate, or GUR, with a data fusion platform to analyze French satellite imagery, and that Safran.ai and the GUR signed an agreement at the end of February 2025 before the U.S. suspension of intelligence sharing with Ukraine. So France is really stepping up a lot of ways, though. They're trying to become a regional power again in a military sense, and Ukraine is this opportunity for them to do that, though. So Macron is doing some good things by doing that, though. Two Ukrainian officers told Time that some European intelligence agencies are trying to fill the gap following the U.S. suspension of intelligence sharing to Ukraine, but that it will take time for European authorities to deploy these capabilities, and that Europe is unlikely to entirely make up for U.S. intelligence capacity anytime soon. This would mainly be like satellite intelligence sharing, early airborne early warning systems, stuff like that, though, and also just the logistics that the American Air Force is able to provide. But this is also an opportunity. You know, this is why I keep putting out these stock numbers with people in our chat, though. This is only going to be a long-term endeavor, and Europe's going to become much stronger in the long term for this, though. But at the same time, if we could help ourselves, then we should do that. The bottom of stack, guys. I'll play this in the background here. Well,
Доповідаю. Третя окрема штурмова
Colonel
бригада
Beletsky
офіційно
speaks. He talks about the expansion of the 3rd Assault Brigade into the 3rd Army Corps, further showcasing Ukraine's efforts to transition to a core structure. Ukraine's 3rd Separate Assault Brigade announced on the 14th that Ukrainian military command restructured the unit as the 3rd Army Corps. This is also with the old Azov Brigade under Prokopenko. They also are now in a corps. Um, yeah. Anyway, so this goes into the long-term trend I was talking about. How successful units are growing. Failed units are basically being rolled into successful units, and instead of what Siersky was doing with like the 155th or the 150 series of brigades, they're now just going to organically grow good brigades that have had a tradition of success in training and logistics into larger structures now. I have a couple of articles. We'll go and talk about that in detail here in a minute. Okay, so we'll just blow through these couple things here before we get to the articles. So mobilization for Russia. Russian federal subjects continue to increase financial incentives to Russian military personnel to boost recruitment. Irkutsk Oblast Governor Igor Kobzov stated on the 10th that the Oblast increased its one-time payments to about $11,000, and this is a fairly poor part of the uh, greater Russian Federation, Irkutsk being in the east. Putin approved a list on March 10th of instructions for the Russian government and the Defenders of the Fatherland Foundation aimed at increasing social benefits for Russian veterans. Again, trying to, which will put strain on the Russian budget and economy, but again, trying to increase support for the war. Putin called to extend the Defenders of the Fatherland Foundation's fund to to fund family members of Russian servicemen who are missing in action in support of the war in Ukraine, to support veterans' entrepreneurial activities, so basically business loans, I guess, and to increase funding for state social assistance programs and a few other things. Russian presidential aide and secretary of the state Council Alexei Dumin stated that the new commission will coordinate federal and regional government efforts to support Russian veterans. Again, which is more social programs for Russians in that war. Mobilization for Ukraine. European countries continue to announce new military assistance programs and packages for Ukraine. We talked a little bit about France already. Dutch Prime Minister announced that they will reserve up to $3.8 billion for Ukraine in 2026, including $755 million to invest in Ukrainian drones, and the Netherlands could use these funds in 2025 if necessary. Sorry, these funds for 2026. They could use them in this year also. UK Minister of Defense announced a new $38.6 million contract for the U.S. and UK defense technology company Anduril UK to provide Ukraine with LTS 600 meter and LTS 700M strike drones. And anyway, yeah, there's also the issue that the UK has issued Ukraine with the first tranche of funds with revenue generated from the proceeds from frozen Russian assets worth nearly $1 billion. Yeah, Ukraine's European partners may be able to independently supply commercially available satellite imagery to Ukraine amid the suspension of Ukraine's access to U.S. portals with such imagery. Again, I would imagine there'd be a lag problem here with commercial versus military satellites. Um, just be my guess, but that's what Europe's trying to do. They're trying to leverage the availability of commercial satellites versus U.S. military satellites. Financial Times report on the 8th that Anders Linder, the head of the International Division of Commercial Satellite Imagery supplier Maxar Technologies, said that any Maxar's commercial customers, including U.S. allies and partners, can use the data that they purchase from Maxar however they see fit, including sharing it with their allies such as Ukraine. Political reported on the March 7th that Maxar stated that the Trump administration has, quote, decided to temporarily suspend Ukrainian accounts in GTAC-EGD, the U.S. National Geospatial Intelligence Agency Global Enhanced Geo Delivery System. Sorry, these acronyms are so fucking long. Which is the main portal for accessing commercial imagery that the U.S. government has purchased. European states have reportedly been discussing ways to compensate for the intelligence that the U.S. has stopped providing Ukraine. Ukraine's European allies continue to provide military assistance and technical support, and that includes uh, Sweden providing 3 billion Swedish kroner, or roughly $300 million, in assistance. This would include additional 18 artillery systems, awesome self-propelled artillery systems, 5 Arthur counter-battery radar systems, and financial support for Ukrainian shell initiative and domestic artillery production. Okay, do have one piece of rear area activity here for you guys. So this was from Atesh, which is the Ukrainian partisan group. They report on the 12th that Ukrainian partisans conducted a successful sabotage attack against Russian military rail line near Sevastopol, Crimea on the 9th, and this impeded transport of ammunition. So this is that video. It's a loud bang, so I'll try to turn it down a little bit here. It was just a Sorry, it was a bird back there, I guess. It was just there was a picture of it, but it was just a small charge on the rail line, so they just severed the line there too. Anyway, so pretty good stuff. All right, guys, that does it for the PowerPoint. Let me bring up the articles here. Let me just make sure that is good. I'm gonna put in my other window here. Make sure that is all good, and maximize that out so we can talk a little bit about some other things too. I'll try to be as brief as possible. It will also deliver the information I'm trying to give to you guys. So let's transition over to Syria really quick. There is that's a little too big. So we all heard about HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, taking power in Syria for the most part. Some amplifying information. There was actually an agreement between the Syrian Democratic Forces and HTS for the SDF, which are the Kurds, to integrate government and military forces into the new provincial government in Damascus, or provisional, sorry, government in Damascus. So that is close to a resolution in the civil war. Unfortunately, at the same time, old Assad holdouts, mainly the Alawites, in this case, I would argue justifiably, are revolting against the new government. Um, there have been many videos. I haven't showed any actually, just because I show enough of the POWs being killed by Russians. Many civilians, to the tune of a couple hundred, I guess. This is just like open source intelligence is saying at least a couple hundred have been executed by these Turkish jihadists, basically. The Alawites are a predominantly Christian sect within Syria, and they used to be the old Assad's family is Alawite, and they are now falling victim under the new regime. So what we're seeing here is an uprising in mainly Latakia and Tartus provinces here, which are coincidentally also the provinces that Russia used to have a major foothold in. I don't know if there's a correlation there or not, but that's shouldn't be surprising. But anyway, so what we're seeing here, at least as of this publishing of this is from the 7th of the March here. This is the area where uprisings have happened and have some. So there is a presence by Assad forces in this case in some of these areas here. So again, mainly in Latakia and Tartus provinces, but also stretching out into almost near Homs and Hama. There's been reports of ambushes against HTS forces, some success by these insurgents, but again, we're entering a new phase of the conflict here. It's far from over, and unfortunately, don't know how successful these guys will be, but the supposed composition of these forces are Assad hardliners and the old successful generals. So these are men with deep influence in the old government and a lot of these old provinces. The hold by the HTS over Syria is very delicate right now. It's very fragile. And if there's a concerted effort by the Alawite rebels here and the old Assad holdouts, it could enter into a definite phase where this war is extended for a very long time. So that's what's happening in Syria right now. There's some other data here. Again, we're talking about SDF. The HTS part of the map here has talked to the SDF part, and they've agreed to basically form a government between them and bring in their militaries as one force. So you might start seeing Kurds fight Christian Alawites in these two provinces here. So that's what's happening there. We'll go over to the open source Intel Twitter thing here. So this is a quick map. Reuters reports that Russia has presented the United States with its list of demands for a deal to end the ongoing war in Ukraine. This is another weird thing that Putin has said. He says, I agree to the ceasefire in principle, but let's just solve the whole damn thing. And here's my list of demands. Again, this hasn't changed really anything, but from the source of Reuters reporting, um, Russia has presented the United States with its list of demands to deal with an end to the ongoing war in Ukraine and reset diplomatic relations with Washington. Officials stating that the list includes broad and similar to previous demands made to Ukraine, the U.S., and NATO. Terms are said to include no membership in NATO for Ukraine, an agreement not to deploy foreign troops or peacekeeping forces to Ukraine after the war, and international recognition of Russia's claim to Crimea as well as Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia in southeastern Ukraine. So I just wanted to show you this map here really quickly, though, just because this will show the administrative borders of these oblasts and obviously why this is not feasible. The light yellow here is where Russia was in control but then got kicked out, along with Luhansk here. Sorry, I've been talking for almost 2 hours. But yeah, Russia has no chance of taking this ground right here in any foreseeable future. But again, because they annexed these territories and now it's Russian law that these are Russian provinces, it's just absolute dog shit. They want that recognized by the international community. My push against that is saying that, well, the one administrative center you took, which was Kherson in Kherson Oblast, you lost like 2 weeks after ratifying that. So your own military fucked up the veracity of your claim there, motherfucker. But anyway, that's what's pushing on here, and this is the map that Russia's pushing for a final settlement. Okay. There was an agreement with the U.S. and Ukraine on the minerals deal, which they say was complete. Ukraine's ready to sign it, but America hasn't signed it, I guess. Yeah, and this is reporting on the 14th. This is only 5 days ago. Nothing new about this either. Details, it was Stefan Yira, who's the Ukraine's deputy prime minister, reiterated Ukraine's readiness to sign the minerals agreement with the U.S. at any time and noted the negotiations on the text and the agreement have been completed. Quote, the agreement is ready. There are no changes to the text. The negotiations are closed, she said. She said the U.S. side has not decided when and under what conditions they want to sign it at this stage. Ukraine is ready to sign it at any time. I think this is because, based off my understanding, that this mineral agreement is basically to more of Ukraine's favor. And this is another example of Ukraine having agency to negotiate down the United States demands, but at the same time not powerful enough to coerce the United States to sign on favorable Ukrainian terms. It might be at some point Trump just throws up his hands and says, "Fuck it, yeah, let's just sign the damn thing." But again, this is just how well Ukraine is still able to punch above their weight, despite everything going on now. So I give this as an example to people say, hey, don't fucking just give up on this. Ukraine's still fighting tooth and nail, so don't fucking just say everything's lost. This is a bit of interesting historical, not how to put it, looking back almost 11 years now. There was the trade house fire in Odessa. This was a big thing for both sides. This was a counter Maidan revolt, basically, by the pro-Russian side. And what happened was, it was a whole lot of controversy with this, though. There was a big protest in Odessa. Originally, let's see here, there was a protest by pro-Russians in Odessa to protest against Maidan. The nationalists and hooligans went to a football game in Odessa. They heard about the protest by the Russian side, then they went to go show up. The pro-Russian side found two Ukrainian nationalists, shot them in an alleyway, shot them dead, and then that just spiraled out of control. It culminated to the point where both sides were throwing Molotov cocktails at each other, and eventually the trade union house caught fire. Um, both sides claimed the other side started the fire, but you brought in combustible liquids into a building, so it's kind of on the person that is holding that combustible material that it started the fire. So I would claim the Russian side is at fault here, but that's just me. But again, there's video of the Ukraine side pulling out people from the fire, so it's not like they're being inhumane. They want people to come out and not burn to death. But at the same time, this new development says that the European Court of Human Rights has made a significant ruling on several lawsuits regarding Ukraine's inaction. In this case, the law enforcement during the clashes between pro-Russian, pro-Ukraine activists in Odessa on the 2nd of May 2014, which led to the deaths of 47 people. The court acknowledged that these events were largely provoked by Russian propaganda, but also pointed out violations committed by Ukraine, which is now required to pay compensation. The ruling concerns on the events of the 2nd of May 2014, which began with an attack by the pro-Russian anti-Maidan activists on participants of a pro-Ukraine demonstration. The clashes and killing of pro-Ukraine demonstrators led to a storming of the anti-Maidan tent camp in Kolokove Pulse Square and a fire at the trade union house. Where dozens of anti-Maidan supporters died. Relatives of 25 of the people who were killed, as well as 3 survivors of the fire, filed lawsuits in Strasbourg. Among the plaintiffs were 2 relatives of 2 Ukraine activists who were shot and killed. Those are the 2 I was talking about. 3 others who identified in the media as passers-by also died from gunshot wounds. The rest were members of the anti-Maidan group who and their relatives who were caught in the fire. The trade union house. However, the court emphasized that it did not identify the victims by their ideological affiliations. I guess that's a good thing. Despite the differences in views of the participants in these events, all the plaintiffs held Ukraine responsible for its inaction. Again, the state being the law enforcement, this whole thing, claiming that the state could have prevented the tragic consequences. However, the court repeatedly stated that in the body of the ruling and its conclusions that the primary culprit of the events was Russia and its actions to destabilize Ukraine. The court considers that such disinformation propaganda might have had an impact on the tragic events in the present cases too. The pro-Russian Kulakove Pole movement in Odessa relied heavily on aggressive and emotional disinformation and propaganda measures about the new Ukrainian government and the Maidan supporters voiced by Russian authorities and mass media of the ruling states. It goes on and on and on. In view of this, the court found Ukraine guilty of violating the article of the European Convention of Human Rights on the right to life. The Ukraine state must pay 15,000 euros in compensation to the relatives of each of the victims and 12,000 to the 3 plaintiffs who survived but suffered serious burns. The highest compensation of 17,000 euros will be paid to the daughter of Mikhailo Vyacheslavov, who burned to death in a trade union building, as she also complained about the authorities' unreasonable and prolonged refusal to give her father's body for burial. Russia was not a party in the plaintiff's complaints. So that was just interesting to share with you guys. It's weird how this ruling came out. It's kind of one of those weird things where, how to put it, the corruption of the state was definitely a factor in this whole thing. Yanukovych, being who he was, fled to Russia after the Maidan was concluded. The effect of his administration definitely played a part in the efficacy of the Odessa police in this case. But then most governments pick up the tab where the old government left it at, right? So it was up to the incoming Poroshenko government to basically clean up house, and now it's up to the Zelensky government to pick up the tab of what happened under Yanukovych's government. They had to pay out these settlements now to the plaintiffs in this case. Um, I don't know. I people might ask my opinion on this. Um, I don't know. First thing to me, this seems like a very small amount of money uh, for a death in the family, especially when there's, how to put it, a justifiable complaint that the police didn't intervene. Um, That's my first observation. Is this the right call? I mean, based off the fact that you really can't hold Russia accountable, you could point and say they need to pay money, I guess, but like at the same time, it was on Ukrainian soil. The state should have protected, the people, both sides really, and not have let that escalate to the point where nearly 50 people died. Several people shot to death. So I mean, it was just the chaos was allowed to unfold. Um, yeah, so I think this is probably the right ruling despite the circumstances, and that's what was reached. That's just my opinion, but that's how that panned out. It seems. Yeah, so we got a couple articles here about the expansion of the third Assault Brigade into the Third Army Corps. So this first one's from militaryland.net. Pardon me. So on February 4th, we reported on the long-awaited reformation of the Ukrainian military and the establishment of the Army Corps finally being underway. Again, this is from militaryland.net. Um, Today, Andriy Belitsky, commander of the 3rd Assault Brigade, announced the formation of the 3rd Assault Corps based on the brigade, as previously speculated. Belitsky will lead the newly established corps. I imagine he's going to get a generalship out of this. For 3 years, we gained unique experience in the battlefields. This is from Beletsky. Conducted successful counteroffensives, and became the most effective in deploying drones in the front line. We implemented technologies, changed the approach of personnel training, and created the best recruiting system in the country. We launched our own FPV and ATGM schools, and we initiated large-scale cultural and educational projects, and now it's time to expand our horizons. No further details were disclosed at this time, leaving the composition of the Corps unknown. It remains unclear whether the 3rd Assault Brigade will continue to exist as a separate military unit or its subordination will be expanded to a regiment or even multiple brigades. So that's from militaryland.net, but this is from, okay, because that website acts gay sometimes. This is from mil.in.ua. So this is from Military Yarny, which is a pretty good website. It's a Ukrainian website that reports on military news, basically. So this particular article goes a little bit more in depth. 3rd Assault Brigade of the Armed Forces, 3rd Assault Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has officially been restructured in 3rd Assault Corps. Um, yeah, the new corps will be built upon the following principles: combat training, professional non-commissioned officer corps, and work management, planning, and technology. The transition marks the beginning of a long discussed process for the Ukrainian Armed Forces, like we talked about, to the core system. The main function is to coordinate brigade actions and in specific area of offensive and defensive offensive and defense while ensuring the units have the resources needed to fulfill their tasks. A corps can include between 2 and 5 brigades, and the number of personnel can range from 10 to 50,000 or more, depending on the country and by the type of army and the tasks at hand. The Corps Command will have enough resources at its disposal to allocate to specific areas of the front based on the needs and strategic objectives. Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Alexander Syrskyi, confirmed the new corps would replace the Operational Tactical Groups, or OTGs, on the front lines. We're still seeing that used as spokesmen, though, so we'll start seeing eventually spokesmen changed out for these new corps spokesmen. This is an article about the experience of a man in Kursk. Um, Basically, it was very tough and how successful they were. He said he killed close to 70 VDV soldiers. That's according to this guy here. But let's see if we can get down to the chain here. Okay, sorry, it doesn't seem. Okay, I don't know. X is acting weird. So originally this post was meant to explain the whole thing. Um, Overall a success, but again there was complications and command did a lot of fucked up things, unfortunately. Um, Again we're kind of going through this quickly here, guys, because I do want to wrap it up. Uh, so despite what Russia's been saying about Mariupol being rebuilt, it's running out of it's running out of water because they haven't I mean, basic bitch things like electricity and plumbing are the first things you got to rebuild in the middle of a city. They're much more worried about, again, building a facade of rebuilding Mariupol, but people are dying of water shortages, basically. For nearly 2 weeks, Ukraine city Mariupol, which is currently under Russian occupation, has faced severe water shortages as reservoirs dry up. Water is now being rationed in some districts it's undrinkable. Despite having ample warning, occupation officials have only just begun to address the crisis. The proposed solution, however, may not be operational until 2027, if they even get to that. The Okay, so we'll just get down to the bit here. On February 24th, the anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the occupation authorities announced that the city of Mariupol would transition to a scheduled water distribution system. Since March 3rd, the local utility company has provided water for just 6 hours a day, from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., and then from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Yeah. Outside of those hours, officials claimed the water would still flow, albeit at slow pressure. But residents in outlying districts told Bamuga, which is the source this is taken from, that that this is not the case. Either water is completely cut off, or it never reaches the upper floors of apartment buildings due to weak pressure. Moreover, water quality has deteriorated significantly in some areas. Residents report that the water is yellow or rust colored, forcing them to buy bottled water. The water comes out yellow, and we have to drop chlorine tablets in it, one resident said. The shutdowns follow the schedule, but since our building lacks a proper pump, the water doesn't reach the upper floors. People living in central Mariupol and detached buildings told Bamuga that they've encountered I'm sorry, they told Bamuga they haven't encountered these issues. Just 1 week after the new water schedule took effect, occupation authorities reported a rise in acute intestinal infections. Um, haven't encountered. Okay, anyway, I guess it's different issues that they have acute intestinal infections, which they attributed in part to poor water quality and lack of hygiene. In comments about under the announcements, residents expressed outrage that they are forced to wash their hands with rusty water. Compounding the crisis, water in the city is also periodically shut off due to pipe bursts. In some cases, residents have been left without water running for more than 24 hours. Sergei Koval, director of the Mariupol branch of Voda Donbasa, the city's water and sanitation provider, attributed the reservoir's depletion to low precipitation levels, claiming that other nearby cities are facing similar issues. However, he insisted that a total water cutoff was not planned. According to Russia's Territorial Development Fund, the reservoir has lost more than 60% of its original 47 million cubic meters of water. There are plans to address the shortfall by redirecting water from another reservoir located 22 kilometers away, but that system won't be operational until March 2027. Mariupol's exiled city council warned on December 2024 that the water levels in the reservoir dropped by close to 20 feet. And the Ukrainian officials have also stressed the reservoir was never meant to serve as Mariupol's primary water source and has always had a backup supply. Anyway, so there you go. Russia's slowly killing off the remains of Mariupol. Yeah, that yeah. I don't know. It's just fuck's sakes, dude. Ugh. Like if you could present this to the wider political establishment, I'm sure something might change in aid to Ukraine, but it's not happening. You know what? I'll make this the last. Well, two more things. Um, so this is just a quick little tidbit about the European defense stocks rising following Trump's statements. Um, so this is a couple of examples here. Thales Group within how much time? This is all Cyrillic. I apologize, guys, but you can see the graphs here. They speak for themselves. It's just major gains on from the Europeans on many of their defense their stocks worth. My bad. Um, anyway, it's also worth noting that U.S. defense stocks have fallen badly here. For example, Lockheed Martin's shares fell 16%, Northrop Grumman by 13%, General Dynamics by close to 11%. And this is, let's see here, EU countries are also expected to invest between 5 to 700 billion in rearmament over the coming years. This amount, according to some European politicians, may increase if the war in Ukraine ends in 2025, as the need to modernize armies will remain relevant due to global political tensions. Um, yeah, and this is all from statements on March 2nd, 2025. Um, yeah, I'm telling you guys, like, yeah, this is a major opportunity for a lot of people. People say, "Well, this is on the high here." I'm like, there was one statement I got from a YouTube, a reliable source. They said that 2/3 of European military arms is from the United States. I don't know if that's probably a high estimation or not, but if it's even half, the cap on that is still very high, and it's a long-term investment, and the returns are already there. So I would definitely say invest in European defense companies. Okay, last thing, guys. Talked about this already, but since we got the word out a little bit, it's not, it's not that we're the ones responsible, but it sounds like the word got out and now it's catching fire. Musk canceling that Yale research team to find lost Ukrainian children is now going mainstream, basically. Elon Musk large-scale cuts to the U.S. government have suspended the work of Yale University team that helped rescue hundreds of Ukrainian children abducted by Russia. In case it was over 1,200 out of the low count of 20,000. So hopefully this catches some fire, and maybe some of these programs, which are good, will get their funding back, because no one wants to see abducted white children stay lost in Russia. Details. Until now, the U.S. government has funded a group of researchers from Yale University's Humanitarian Research Lab who used open source technology to track missing children and share their findings with the Ukrainian authorities to help bring them back home. Hundreds of children rescued thanks to their efforts. But now this work will cease due to Musk's recent federal funding cuts. Ukraine government says that nearly 20,000 children have been abducted by Russia since the start of the invasion, and yeah, now it's at risk of being shut down completely. So hopefully this legitimate pushback will overturn Musk's anti-white actions. So that does it for the show, guys. I'm going to wrap it up really quickly here. We're done over 2 hours. I was hoping to keep this under 2, but a lot to go over, and I thank you all for enjoying the show. If you guys have any questions, please join our chat over at t.me/Radio Ruin chat. If you want updates from me, my channel is at t.me/the Warcast. If you want to support the show, please donate at buymeacoffee/Wcast. We will be back in 2 weeks for another brief. We'll also be back next week for a normal combat footage show. And that is what we have on the docket coming up in the short term horizon here. So God bless. Do something good this week, and we'll see you all next. We'll see you all next show.